The beauty of music is it is so abstract sometimes, especially a lot of orchestral music in a way, so it can be one of the most human ways to kind of, again, like talk about difficult subjects.
I'm Sarah Hicks, principal conductor of Live at Orchestra Hall with the Minnesota Orchestra. Anxiety has been with me for most of my life. Making music with others has been foundational in helping me feel grounded and whole. This is Music and Healing.
What does being at peace in your body feel like?
Our online audience contributed responses to questions about anxiety, and their voices are centered in composer Molly Joyce's composition, Serenity, which made its world premiere in our Music and Healing concert.
When my body starts to relax, it feels tired at first because it is usually holding so much tension. The release and ease is unfamiliar at first, but feels welcoming. Then I feel like I can move freely without impediments.
Feels like a river flowing.
Tell me about this piece, Serenity. How did it come to be?
So I think it was the orchestra's idea to solicit audience responses around anxiety, like what does anxiety feel like for you, what does peace in your body feel like, and then how you move from being anxious to comfort. And it was interesting actually seeing the commission, because I've done a couple iterations of a project now with spoken voices, specifically with disabled interviewees, so it did feel like a natural progression of my practice in a way, but of course this time with orchestra and then Minnesota audiences specifically.
So you have incorporated other people's voices, and that is important to you.
Yeah, definitely.
And so how does that impact the way you think about writing?
Sure. So it's very interesting. It's been a natural progression, I think, of my practice to incorporate that. And I think there's nothing better than, including someone's literal and figurative voice, almost, actually really hearing it and getting that perspective. And certainly with the writing, it's actually quite stressful for me, I think, sometimes, because I'm trying not to override the voices with my, artistic idea, especially around, usually these questions are very clear conceptually, like anxiety or access or care, and I'm trying to just, if anything, support what they're saying and hopefully bring the viewer or the listener more in the moment of that responses and just really heightening their responses rather than, again, kind of overriding it with my artistic interpretation.
How do you find that balance? Because you are a composer, you're creative, and you have your own ideas, and then you take someone else's words, and as you said, you're trying to support it, but also have your voice.
I think it's interesting. I think I'm always, playing around with it, trying to find better methods, because I think I'm also trying to make the music hopefully somewhat interesting or evolving, if that makes sense, like not totally ambient, if that makes sense as well, or not totally still. And I think I try to just really let the words guide me as well. And usually with these projects, too, I like to include audience responses that contradict each other next to each other as well, to show that there's many different ways of interpreting these terms, and that, it's ultimately, not to sound cheesy, but really the human experience. It's all subjective, and that's what really inspires me as well.
I loved working on your piece because it was like just beautifully orchestrated, but also kind of hypnotic in these incredible repeated patterns, but they were always shifting so that it actually took you somewhere imperceptibly, and then you sort of ended up somewhere. And there's no narrative, obviously, but do you sort of think about that as a composer, like where you want to end up?
I think I try to just, I follow a lot of my intuition with it, I think, with evolving the music, and probably drive you crazy with that, with all the time signatures changing and counting and everything.
It was a lot.
Anxiety for me is like being trapped in a box from which I can't escape.
Anxiety feels loud and fast. It feels like everybody is trying to talk to me all at once, but I can't understand what they're saying.
We all have our own personal experiences and our relationship with anxiety. What is yours?
So I definitely come from a family of, I would say, planners, I think, and it's anxiety-ridden, and not in a totally bad way, but just I think it's kind of in my DNA. And I once read a quote that said, like, worrying is like paying a debt that you don't know, which I really love thinking about. And so, of course, I'm not trying to say I just try to get rid of the anxiety, but also just trying to kind of label it kind of as we addressed in the concert as well. And I think it's interesting, at least as a musician, because sometimes you feel like the anxiety and worrying has gotten you to where you are, if that makes sense as well, or being very detail-oriented. And so it's hard to kind of feel like, oh, I don't need that anymore or something as well, because it's like a catch-22, or you feel like it's gotten you so far. And
That bit resonated with me because I do have that feeling because I worry and get anxious about things. It makes me more detail oriented and to try to plan as much as possible.
And then you feel like you've gotten so far with that,
because
so you can't,
you can't stop being anxious. But I think for me, I have to separate myself from what do I really need to do, and is that being driven by perfectionism or what is perfectionism? Is it anxiety about meeting some sort of external standard? And so it's separating all those things out.
Oh my God, without music, I wouldn't be able to exist. I grew up as a very quiet, modest, introverted baby boomer. I found out later that I had generalized anxiety disorder and a few other close seconds. There is no medication that helps me more than music of all styles. I received 2 degrees in music education just to stay close to music. When my close and dearest spouse wants to go to a concert, I scream, "Yes, please."
So as a conductor, I don't get really anxious when I'm going on stage because I feel like it's not mine, it's everyone else's. It's all of ours. It's a group effort. So I have sort of control over 80 people because they know how I move and what that means. But in the end, I don't. So I do have to sort of give it away. And when you do that, the anxiety fades because it's no longer about you or your ego or anything.
It's all about the
it is kind of about the ego in some way. And it's interesting because I think all performers and musicians cope with it on some
there
level.
has to be some. Because sometimes I feel like it is a good thing, or I feel like that means I care, I tell myself, or something. If I wasn't nervous or anxious, or maybe that would not be as good as well, or it just shows that it's important to me. But,
Right. How do you channel when you do have anxiety? Do you channel it somewhere, or do you put it aside, or do you label? Everyone has a coping mechanism when it's immediate and it's right there, and you have to say, okay, I've got to keep doing what I'm doing. So what's your immediate go-to?
File it under this folder on my desktop now. I think especially with performing, or my voice teacher encouraged me to just address it and almost lean into it in a way. I guess I feel like a lot of the performances I do are very vulnerable in a way, or the songs, it's all about disability, and so I think I try to lean into it, and I feel like even if it's heard in my voice, like that's what it is. And I think I've been influenced a lot by disability aesthetics and culture that kind of tries to veer away from imperfection or not, or just letting those kind of influence the work as well, the artistic work of the performance. So but it's easier said than done. I think it's easier, when you're feeling it. And of course, I don't know about you, I think songs that I perform more frequently, then it's almost muscle memory, or I'm not as anxious. I think it's always when it's like a new song or mix, or the different electronics. Sometimes I just have a lot of anxiety over the technology working. We're feeling something's going to connect.
Sense.
And,
Right.
But it's just part of the experience.
How do you move from feeling anxious to comfort?
Being in nature gives me perspective. I feel grounded, connected, and joyful.
Music from my Sunshine playlist, which are songs that always bring me joy, and spending time walking and moving in nature are 2 things that help me move from feeling anxious to feeling at ease, always without fail.
Of course, I'm biased, but I feel like it's one of the most direct forms of public engagement, literally, to have people, recording their voices or responding to questions, and then they show up at a concert and hear it literally integrated in a piece. And I think it's one of the most human ways to kind of, again, like, talk about difficult subjects as well, I think, because I think the beauty of music is it is so abstract sometimes, especially a lot of orchestral music in a way, so it can be very subjective and conjure up lots of different emotions for different people, but then and then combining that with these very direct interpretations, I think, again, in my view, provides an interesting, hopefully, experience.
Be a part of Music and Healing. Engage in our collection of conversations and share your feedback at minnesotaorchestra.org/healing.